Wendy Nikel. I write science fiction and fantasy, all the way from under 1,000-word flash pieces, all the way up through novels. I have some novellas, time travel, over in the dealer room. And what else?
That's great.
All right, and then I'll just pass the mic.
So I'm Maxwell Alexander Drake. I started as a novelist, epic fantasy. I haven't done that in quite a few years. I was the lead fiction writer for a massive game from Sony for almost 4 years. Last couple of years I've been in TV and movies, sold a couple movie scripts, working on a TV show right now. So that's me.
We have another one.
Hi, my name is Kelly Barnhill. I am the author of 4 novels for children, The Mostly True Story of Jack, Iron-Hearted Violet, Witch's Boy, and The Girl Who Drank the Moon, which won the Newbery Medal in 2017. I also write short stories for grown-ups that have been published all in lots of different places, and a few of them were collected into a book called Dreadful Young Ladies that was published by Algonquin last year.
Okay. And I'm David Farland. I'm a science fiction and fantasy author with about close to 60 novel-length works at this point. I'm also an anthology editor and the lead judge for the Writers of the Future contest and other things.
Yeah, awesome.
Thank you. So to get started, I know probably one of the things that people ask you when they read your books is, where did you come up with that? Tell the audience a little bit about maybe where you get your ideas or what you do to spark an idea. Whoever wants to start.
Okay, I'll start. It's hard to talk about stuff like that because, a lot of times it's just not the same from story to story, right? Sometimes you'll be reading a newspaper article and it'll make you think about a thing, which makes you think about a thing that makes you think about a thing. And sometimes you will wake up from a very strange dream, or sometimes, in my case, you get weird visions and then you go home and you write it down and put it in a box. One of my other jobs besides being a writer is I teach in the MFA program at Hamlin University. They've got an MFA in children's and young adult literature. And one of the things that I have my students do quite a lot is a weekly practice that is called, it's the best writing exercise that I know, called the 100, where you sit down and you force yourself to write 100 first lines of stories that don't exist, but that you would like to read someday. And the thing is that the majority of them are going to be terrible, right? But you have to write the terrible sentence in order to write the good sentence, And doing that every week does give you just some source material for when you get stuck. So that is my piece of advice that I give to my students, and I'll give to you for free.
Yeah, the truth is that every story can start in a number of different ways. It can start with the idea for a theme that you want to work on. It may be started because you get an idea for a character or an interesting place that you would like to create. And every story, especially when you get a novel like works, may have 100 different ideas combined. And so I don't say that there has to be any one place that you start, but I think that it starts with you being interested in training yourself to think about ideas and to recognize that when you've got one and you go, ooh, I've got to go write that one down. I don't think I go through a day, especially at a conference like this, where I don't get a dozen ideas for novels. It's just a part of me now. And yet I could tell you that when I was 17, I wasn't getting an idea for a novel every day, okay? It came with the writing and actually getting down and training your subconscious to be looking for those ideas. When those ideas start coming to you in dreams, that's usually your subconscious saying, okay, you've got to go write this one.
Pay attention.
Yes.
Pay attention.
So going off of what was just said, one of the things that I enjoy doing is combining ideas. So I have lists. I have an app on my phone that has a list. I have lists in notebooks, and every once in a while, when I want to start something new and I'm not really sure what to write, I go and I start just shoving things, squishing them together, figuring out, okay, well, what if I write about this kind of character in this kind of situation? And they may be combinations that you wouldn't necessarily think of off the top of your head, but I know that they're things that I'm interested in writing and just looking at a different way.
So yeah, there's nothing really to add to that. They all come in different areas. I do have a point, it's the crazy. My favorite story of how I came up with the story, I was driving down and there was a billboard that said vasectomies. It's easier than you think. And by the time I got to my destination, I had destroyed the entire human race because the government was trying to control population. And it came from that billboard. But the reality is, and what I wanted to add, and the point was, it is a skill. Generating ideas is a skill, which means the more you do it, the better you get at it. I teach at a lot of writers' conferences. I bump into people. They're like, "Oh no, I've got this one idea, and I'll never." Sure. When I wrote my first book when I was 12, I was like, I will never come up with another idea after this one. And I've been doing this for a while. So, it just, the more you kind of let your mind wander and ask those what-if questions and go down those corridors, you will find that you will come to a convention and get 12 ideas in 1 hour, and you'll throw all of them away because A, you can't write that many, but B, just because you come up with an idea doesn't mean it sticks. So for me, in the beginning, I actually used to carry a tape recorder, and I'd get an idea and I go, blah, 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 and I get another idea and I do it. And now I don't, because if an idea cannot stick with me for 2 or 3 weeks, if I forget it, then it really probably wasn't as good an idea as I thought. But that's just because I come up with so many ideas so fast now.
Yeah.
This is our mic.
And when I was and just because an idea doesn't stick with you doesn't actually mean it's not a good idea. And it might just not be a good one for you.
Right.
Years ago, I had a friend who, when I was a kid in school, we had a kid that brought some baby bear to school that his dad had shot a bear, and then it had a cub, and so he brought this cub to school, and I thought it was so cute. And so as I got older, I wanted to write a story about sentient bears. Well, I thought about it and thought about it. I thought, oh no, that's kind of stupid. And then a couple of years later, a story came out called Bears Discover Fire by Terry Bisson. Won the Hugo and Nebula for Best Book of the Year. Exactly the same idea. It just doesn't matter. A lot of times it's just grab the idea and execute it, and it may go big.
Yeah.
And that's it. I didn't mean that it wasn't a good idea.
No.
If it doesn't stick with me, it means that it's not an idea that keeps me excited.
Yeah.
And if you can't keep me excited for 2 weeks on an idea, I'm not going to spend 6 months writing that idea.
Yeah.
So that's it.
Yeah.
One thing that is, I think, worth noting too. So first of all, ideas are actually kind of cheap. We come up with them all the time, and we come up with them when we don't even realize that we are, because the human brain is narrative, right? We think in stories. We are creatures of soul and story, and we think in stories. We remember in stories. We plan for the future in stories. We dream in stories. We worry in stories. Anxiety is narrative, by the way, right? All of these things are narrative, and in fact, the structures in our brain that we use for thinking in narrative are really old. They're older than language. We've been telling stories since before we could talk. So this idea that that I don't have any ideas. I don't have any ideas, right? That's actually a lie.
Mm-hmm.
You actually have infinity ideas literally all the time. And so being able to call that out and recognize it for what it is, I think is really important. Because what's going to stop you from writing is not a lack of ideas. You have tons. What's going to stop you from writing is a lack of self-confidence. And because the trick is not to have an idea. The trick actually is the execution. And that is skills and practice, right? And so the only ways to get that is to go through it and to practice and to develop those skills.
Here.
I'll let them talk.
Oh yeah, good idea.
Well, kind of going along with that, what are some of the things that you do to practice either having confidence in your ideas or stretching yourself to come up with new things. Talk a little bit about that.
I am the kind of writer, especially with my short fiction, that I love writing prompts. And if someone can give me, a list of words and make those into a story, that is the kind of challenge that I enjoy. And a lot of my short stories have come from writer's prompts. A lot of times, if you go out looking online on, like the Submission Grinder, and you see anthologies that are looking for stories, that I love those because they give you a word count to try to hit, and they give you a theme. They usually have some sort of general tone that they're looking for, and that's the kind of challenge that I really enjoy is, okay, can I write something for this particular thing? And I might combine that with an idea that I had earlier that's been running through my head and find a way to make it work.
Yeah, so some of my best short stories have come from that, and that's not how I write. I don't like my wife never nags me because we would have gotten divorced a long time ago. You can't tell me anything. But I've been in probably 20, 25 anthologies where it's, here's the topic, here's the theme, here's the word count, here's the deadline, make that happen. And those are the ones that I actually sit in front of a blank screen and go, because now I'm stranded. The kids movie that I just sold literally started this way. We were driving wherever, and I misread the license plate in front of me. I actually said, Snursh, that's a really interesting name. And my wife said, that says senior nurse. But by the time I got home, I had him, he was a puppet, and I had everything about him, his character, his drive, his desire. I built the world, and in 15 minutes, I got home, and I was like, holy crap, this is awesome. And that was 12 years ago. 12 years later, I sold it as a movie script. But literally, it was me misreading a license plate in Las Vegas, and it became a kids movie.
Cool. I think also just being in that place of curiosity and wonder, I think, is really important. And also, when you notice yourself stuck on an issue or something that feels important to you, I think that it's good to notice that, because usually that means that there's a story there. When I started Girl Who Drank the Moon, before I started that book, I had been thinking a lot about this notion of false narratives. And I have a lot of friends in journalism, and I saw what they were going through in the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina, when journalism really had to take a really hard, long look at itself. And these issues of bias and racism and how that comes into language, and geographic bias and economic bias, all these different things, right? And that was really interesting to me because really all human ills are narrative in origin, right? Racism is narrative. Sexism is narrative. Wars are started because of story. Atrocities are justified through narrative, right? That was really interesting to me. And I was thinking about that, and I knew that there was a book in there. It just took me a while to figure out what my entry point was. And then one day I had a vision of a swamp monster, and the rest is history. So.
Yeah, one of the things that your question was, how do you convince yourself to write the story? And one thing that I like to do is, if I've got an idea that I think are cool for a story. For example, years ago I was asked to write a Star Wars novel.
Ooh, fun.
Okay, and so I got 3 friends together from my writing group, and I went and I just wrote down a bunch of ideas. Okay, and then I said, I've got this idea, and then I threw out the idea, and I watched to see whose eyes lit up. If all 3 of them had their eyes light up, okay, and they go, ooh, that gives me chills, then I'd like, okay, that one goes in. And if nobody did, then I was like, yeah, okay, that was a loser. Okay, and that's the way that I approached it. And then you can do the same thing when you start writing. Say, oh, I'm starting a story. Here's the first 2 pages. Take it to your writing group and bounce it off of a few people, and just see if they get excited about the idea. You know that they're excited when they start telling you how you should write the story, okay? because that means that they are so involved that they're like, okay, this story has to come to life somehow, and so I want to do it. Other ways to get excited about it, just sit back and think about kind words that people have said about your stories in the past. Paychecks really excite me, okay? If I get a royalty check, I'm like, oh, I want more of those. I'll go write some. And if it's a small royalty check, I want a bigger one. I'm going to go write something new. Those are great, but also critical reviews, awards, anything that you've got. You should have this kind of wall of fame or something at home that you can go back to help motivate yourself to write.
Yeah. Okay, I just have to say one thing. One time, I have several nieces and nephews, and one time my nephew Charlie was in my house, and a royalty check came, and I opened it, I was like, yes! And Charlie was like, what? And I said, well, you see, Charlie, my love, once upon a time, I wrote only for the love of it, but now I write for Jenks.
Yes, exactly.
Oh, fun with children. Anyway, go on.
You guys have talked a little bit about how you know if an idea is good. How do you know if an idea is bad?
I'll start it.
Good.
So, the TV show I'm working on is basically a cross between South Park and Game of Thrones. There's things in it that are going to piss off people. We will get hate mail. We actually have an FU award internally. We're tracking how much hate mail different jokes get. The winner has to take everybody out and buy them dinner. That's their FU award. They get to pay. I think about this a lot because there is a lot of politically incorrect humor in this. It's an adult TVMA cartoon, and we are pushing the envelope. And you either like politically incorrect humor or you don't. I love it, first of all, because I find it funny because I'm like 12. And second of all, I love it as a creator storyteller because I am the type of writer who wants to push my readers into a very uncomfortable zone because I want them to come out the other side better as human beings. So I want to talk about racism. I want to talk about sexism. I want to go into these topics. And humor is just a great way to, kind of deliver that to an audience in a very fun, lighthearted way, but still hopefully impact them to come out the other side different people than they were at the beginning of it. But when you're dealing with politically incorrect humor, especially in these last 2 years of this massive social shift that this country's going through, that is terrifying. So you do spend a lot of time thinking, okay, that made me laugh, but is it too far? Is it something that's going to get us into real trouble and not just piss off people that deserve to be pissed off? So these are things that you do have to think about. But for really the answer for me for that question is, am I still excited about it a month from now? So one of the characters in that TV series, I count this idea that everything she said, she would say in 3 different accents depending on what it was. If it was completely insane, she said it in this Valley Girl way. Like if it was literally nonsense that she said, she had a Valley Girl accent. If she said something that was crazy insane, funny insane, she said it in a Cockney accent. But she's also the most deadly killing machine in the entire universe. So every once in a while, her sanity will seep through, and I wrote her just like Uma Thurman played Poison Ivy in the Batman movies. So she would say this long, eloquent sentence with these big words dripping with just hate and vengeance and violence. And it was hilarious to me until I got to about the 3rd episode, and it started to drag on me as the writer in it. And as soon as that happens, I realize that if it's starting to bug me and it's starting to get old to me, it's going to get old to the audience. So I had to take a step back, and I had to rethink of how I wanted her voice to come across, and I ended up coming up with something else. It's actually something Chris Pratt kind of gave me, but I had to rewrite all of her lines of dialogue because it was a better way. It was a better way to deliver this character. So the idea that I had that I thought was great, and I wrote on for months, ended up not being the right idea, and it took me a while to figure that out. And then it's just ditching the idea, having that that's where that term "killing your darlings" comes from. Killing your darlings means, it doesn't mean killing characters. It means killing those ideas that you think you love but actually aren't what the audience needs. Or you've written the scene and it doesn't play the theme, so you have to cut it. Those are your darlings that they're talking about. It's being willing as a writer to admit that you've made a mistake and then go back and fix that mistake.
This is where editors come in as well. Scratch an editor, find gold. I think that's what Stephen King said. And I once got a note from my editor saying, "Dear Kelly, quote, everybody dies at the end, unquote, is too scary for middle grade." They didn't all die at the end. She was exaggerating, but whatever. It was an extremely devastating ending, and it was actually too sad for middle grade. And the ending that I wrote instead was actually better. It was still actually very sad, but it was sad in a very different way. They didn't all die. They were just all separated in time, blah, 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 whatever. So, but it was too sad. And so I do think that being able to, so on one hand, like I think that writing takes courage, and exploring our ideas take courage. All of this takes courage, but also it takes humility too, and to notice when things aren't connecting or things aren't actually working, and to listen to other people. Not necessarily that you have to take all of their advice, right? Because sometimes people are saying, "I noticed that something is wobbly here," and they'll have an idea to fix it that usually isn't actually correct for your particular piece. But them noticing that it's wobbly, that's the important thing. Like, this idea is not being executed well. I need to make a change. And then fundamentally what happens next, that's up to you, right?
Yeah, on the idea of bad ideas, with the contest that I'm running, I get more short story submissions than any other science fiction editor in the world.
Yeah. Wow.
And so if you've got a science fiction idea, throw it past me, and I will tell you how many times I've seen it in the last month. Because that's what always worries me, is I get, oh, okay, well, this is a pretty good iteration of somebody having their consciousness downloaded into an AI, but it's not going to be that original. I've seen it hundreds of times. In fact, I've written it at least a couple times myself when I was a young writer. So you got to be careful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure.
It's off, by the way, so you just turn it on. It's just causing feedback.
Yeah, I'll do that.
Going back to talking about generating ideas, so what are some of the structures that you've put in place for yourself to capture those or weed them out quickly, and how long do you spend on them before you sort of maybe push it to the side?
Sorry.
Yeah, sure. So every year I participate in NaNoWriMo, National Novel Writing Month, in November. So my last 2 weeks of October are basically spent with a notepad attached to my hand, trying to figure out what am I going to be so excited about writing that I want to spend the next 6 months to a year deeply involved in. And so I spread out all sorts of ideas and work things through and try, writing little scenes of them and try to figure out what am I going to be most passionate about writing? What is the thing that I'm going to want to spend all of those hours going over again and again? What's going to hold my interest during that whole time? And so that's kind of my criteria for determining, okay, is this a good idea? Am I the person that should be writing this? Or is this maybe, not such a great idea? And I've had, up until like the 5th of November that I'll start something and be like, I'm just really not feeling this. And I'll switch over and find a new idea that does excite me.
You also have to look at the story too. So just because you come up with a good idea doesn't mean it's going to be the good idea for that story. This kids movie that I just sold, I came up with probably the best character I've ever come up with. She's a bramble wolf. She was raised by trees. The trees told her adventure stories. She wants to be a hero. The trees didn't understand things like mortality or pain or death. So, and they also didn't really understand stories either, because the hero always dies in the end, no matter what, because they live, trees live a little longer. So when she is introduced in the story, she wants to go on this adventure because she wants to get them all killed, because that's how you become a hero. And then her moral, journey, her moral arc as she goes through is she starts learning, oh no, being a hero is so much more. It's also about fighting for a cause that's worthy. It's about, sacrificing yourself and so on and so forth. And it was very awesome, and it has this really amazing ending to her story that was just absolutely tear-jerking. And then I start writing it, and she is just a serial killer with a death wish. And that character is going into the TV series eventually. I will find a place for this character because I love this character, but in a G-rated kids movie, it didn't work. And it took me a couple months because that was the only time that I've ever bullheaded, just forced myself to keep writing this character when I knew it did not fit the story, because I loved the character so much. And so once I finally got over my own arrogance that I was going to make this work, I backed up and I rewrote and I came up with different, and she turned out 100 times better for this story. I still think it's a weaker character than my original, but for the story, it's amazing, and she's awesome. The director just read it, and his note was, "Wow, Dory on LSD."
That's fun.
For me, that process is different for novels versus short stories. The process for a novel, for me, and of course it's different for everybody, but for me the process is very slow because I have to think about a novel for a really long time before I can start writing it, a year or two. And all of my novels start with a box, and I just throw things in over time. Right now, I have a box for a book that I'm actually avoiding starting called Dispatch from the Hideous Laboratories of Dr. Otto van Dracht. And I've been doing all kinds of research on alchemy and the Holy Roman Empire and the rise of the Habsburgs and shipbuilding and piracy and poisons. Excuse me. And but there's something about that sort of tactile experience of having a box, of having everything live there. Excuse me, I'm going to have you go because I have to cough for a minute. Okay. Excuse me, I'm going to go over here.
The question was, do you have a system for coming up with ideas? And I typically, when I have an idea that I really like, I'll go write a note on my computer and then usually forget about it. But some ideas just keep coming back to haunt you. And I did a little story here for an anthology last year that the idea I know came to me 31 years ago because it came up during a writer's conference, and I did a little outline. And I kept thinking, oh, I'm going to get back to that. And I never got back to it until last year.
That's cool.
Yeah.
And so for me, the novels, it's very tactile. I throw in things for a long time. I just have to think for a long time. For short stories, it's very different. Short stories for me start in kind of a flash, and I have a really good sense of what the story wants to do and what it wants to be. And so for example, I had the experience of listening to the Kavanaugh hearings with my 16-year-old daughter as I was driving her back and forth to theater practice. And it was a strange and galvanizing moment for the two of us, and particularly strange for me because I was her exact same age during the Anita Hill hearings. And that was very galvanizing for me at the time, and in terms of seeing myself as a political person and sort of understanding how dangerous it can be to be a woman in the world, right? And of course, I know all this stuff right now. My email has been awash for the past 5 years with harassing emails. So I get that, I know that, but she doesn't. And that was interesting for me. And so then I started writing a story about a bunch of 1950s housewives who turned into dragons and ate their husbands, and it was kind of fun. But it's like that, right? I was wandering through our Arthurian literature like you do, and ran into this story that was in History of the Kings of England by Gregory of Monmouth, called The 33 Wicked Daughters, which is kind of about the beginning of Albion/England. And it was so cool for me. So I just, and the story just kind of poured out, this sort of retelling of the story of the 33 wicked daughters, who also kill their husbands. Maybe I should tell my husband to sleep with when I open. And that story also kind of poured out, and so I think being sort of open and aware of those things is a good thing to do, and to have a sense of a story's shape, I think is also a good thing to do. Anyway, that story's going to be in the next issue of Fantasy and Science Fiction.
I thought you were pointing.
One of the things that you might notice is that when she comes up with ideas, it's very often when you are studying something or doing research or traveling, get out of your box, I guess is about the easiest thing I can tell you. I like taking trips to foreign countries and stuff because I always come back with a bunch of story ideas that will take me 2 or 3 years to write, okay? And the same is true with reading articles. I read, for example, phys.org, the science news that comes out pretty much twice a day, just to look for new ideas in science fiction and fantasy. And there are plenty of places where nobody has gone.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So
It's hard to remember.
Yeah, we have.
So we've mostly been talking about generating ideas for a news story. But what about, say you're in the revision process and something in your book is just not working. How do you generate ideas to come up with a solution for that, for new parts of an existing story?
Oh, that's a good question.
You want me to? So I'm kind of blessed. I have a very trustworthy team. So I don't necessarily have like a writer's group that I go to. I just have my team that we talk about my stuff. And that's really awesome. And the coolest thing is a lot of them, like my co-creator for this animated TV show is not a writer at all. He's actually my oldest friend. We've been friends since like 2nd or 3rd grade. And so we have the same experiences. We're both the same age. We can pick on the same pop culture things. And he is an engineer. And the beautiful thing, and I've used him for a sounding board forever on just tons of stuff because he has no interest in writing at all, has no interest in understanding stories at all. But engineers think very differently than a writer. So I come at the world in this one perspective, and he comes from an absolutely opposite angle. So, I have a lot of writers that I hang with, or, I have over 2,600 students in Vegas, and I do have a pool of writers that I can pull from for different things, but literally he has been my #1 find for idea bouncing. So when I have a problem with a story, I can't come up with something, I send him an email, I'm like, hey, can we meet Saturday for 3 hours? And then I will tell him the story, and it's a lot of me talking and him throwing every once in a while, but because he's so diametrically opposite of me, it's a great sounding board. So find somebody that's different than you to be your sounding board, not necessarily the exact same person as you, because they're going to come with the same ideas. And that really has helped me fix problems.
Interesting.
So, kind of related, I have a critique partner that I've been working with for like 5 years now, and we've read everything that the other person has written. And my strategy for solving those plot problems seems to be start writing an email to her, explain the story, explain what's going on, explain what the problem is and why I can't do this thing and why I can't do this thing and why that thing doesn't work. And by the time I'm like, have a page or 2 written, I've already figured it out myself.
Never mind.
And then I delete the email.
So one thing that I do, I'm a longhander, and there's all kinds of reasons why I'm a longhander, because I'm a big brain research nerd, and I can tell you all about it later. But I write all my first drafts longhand, and but because of the limitations of that particular way of doing it, because you just don't write as fast as you do when you're typing. So I am always very much aware that what I call draft 0, which is the longhand draft is going to be much thinner than what the actual novel is going to be. And so the way that I handle that is I use a lot of Post-it notes because I will go through, I always read out loud everything that I've just done. And so whatever I have just done in that writing session, as I'm hearing myself say it out loud, other things start to become, these kind of bubble up in terms of awareness. And okay, there needs to be another plot thread about this, or oh my gosh, this might be another really cool thing to explore, or I'm not developing this idea enough, or there needs to be, like, I don't know, a tiny dragon that fits in your pocket, or whatever it is. And so my notebook will then, each page is literally covered in Post-it notes. Now, most of those I won't end up actually using, but when it's time to start, when it's time to start actually writing, I take all of the Post-it notes out and I look through all of them, and I just start to just take some general notes for myself of what are the avenues that are worth exploring, what are the plot threads that are worth stitching in, and how those things will stitch in, and I start to basically like write kind of an explanation to myself. Okay, I think that what I'm trying to do here, and I think that what one of the central dilemmas is, and I think that what this novel is wanting to be that is different than what I'm seeing here is these things. And then I kind of write towards that in draft 1, draft 2, draft 3, draft 47, draft 52, whatever.
Yeah, what they said.
Just one more thing to add that made me think of that is switching the medium that you're using.
Yeah.
So if you always use your laptop, switch over to a different computer in a different area in a different space of your house, or go outside. If you always type in Times New Roman, try switching it over to Arial or some other font. If you always type, try jotting things down longhand or sketching things, or just looking at it a different way, using different parts of your brain can really help those ideas.
I look at my story as a series of road marks, okay? I've got to have a character, I've got to have a setting, and I've got to have some major conflicts. So I look at my character and I say, is my character likable? Is he dynamic? Is he interesting? And I try to figure out, okay, if it's not working, is it from my character? Is my setting something that comes to life? Is it something that is unique? And is it something that people want to be there, so they want to come into my world? And then I'll look at my inciting incident. Okay, how does the character discover that there is a huge problem that they've got to solve? Does it jaw dropping? And then I keep building from plot point to plot point up and through my climax and then into my denouement. And it's pretty easy for me to figure out whether or not this story is going to work, okay? But I'm basically looking at my road marks and seeing, am I getting there? And then if I've got the road marks are working, okay, are the transitions between these various scenes working? Do I come down and have, after I've got a character who tries something and struggles to overcome a big problem, do I make sure that they wrestle with their failure properly and then come up with a cool new way to approach it? And it's just fairly easy for me to do that.
So we have just a couple minutes for questions. Yes, right here.
So do you have personal habits you develop in yourself to try to nurture your creativity?
No. I struggle to stop it. Seriously, when I am driving down the road, I have had times where I literally have been so involved in writing a scene that I'll drive 200 miles and not be aware of anything until I pull into the place where I'm at. And so for me, I don't know. It's almost like I have to struggle to stay in this world. But that's the beauty. I think most of us as authors, most authors are half crazy, and the better
better ones are completely crazy. And so just be aware of that.
Another thing I think is, we just have to fill our creative tanks a lot, right? And be present in the world. And that means, be present in terms of a person with, being in a place of empathy with everybody, right? Because you can't care about your characters if you don't care about the people around you, right? Especially the people who are different from you. That's really important. Another thing, too, is just reading everything. And reading outside of your comfort zone. That's really important. I read a ton of nonfiction. I read a ton of poetry. Lately, I've been reading a ton of early English prose and poetry, just because I need to stretch myself. I'm not a visual thinker at all, but I do respond a lot to visual stimuli. I love looking at art. We've got a wonderful art museum in Minneapolis. It's a free art museum, and I wander the galleries and write while I'm there. So,
You guys have anything? Okay.
Right here.
What emotions affect your ability to create ideas the most?
Easy one answer is grief is probably the most difficult to work through. I know a lot of authors who've had a parent die or a spouse, and usually they're down and out for 2 to 3 years.
Yeah.
Okay. Depression can be very crippling. Anxiety for people who are worried about whether or not they're doing their novel correctly. Those are the big ones. Anger is actually, I got mad at an editor once, and I haven't been able to write the last book in my Runelord series for a long time because I was so pissed off at the guy, I never wanted to work with him again. Okay.
That sucks.
And I was able to write other books just fine, but just not that book. So those are probably the biggest ones that I see as cripplers, but there can be just about anything.
Yeah. Agreed to all that.
Yeah, life.
Yeah.
Life, yes.
It's just life. Gets in the way.
Yeah, it does. It does.
Back over here.
Say you have a character or plot and the idea works into 2 distinct paths. So you have 2 ideas that would work fairly well. What method do you use in deciding on which path to take?
I think, honestly, having your characters decide for you, for me, that's what I do. I do a lot of having my characters talk to me. And through automatic writing and free writing. In the end, our stories are about characters, they're not about ideas, right? The ideas are what, sort of pull it forward and push it forward, but stories are about characters. And so talking to your characters, I think, is the most important thing that you need to be doing.
Also, consider where you want to end up. What kind of story is it? Are you going to want to end on a bittersweet note or a hopeful note, and which of those paths is going to be the most impactful to get you there?
Great.
And if I can't get there from those, I'll go back and dig into the themes that I'm trying. What is that message at that undertone, that invisible layer? And one theme or one idea might actually push a theme that is counterproductive to the major theme that I've been doing, and then that can eliminate that without me even having to worry about it. Oh, I turned it off.
Well, thank you so much, panel. This has been really great. Just really quickly, 10 seconds of shameless self-promotion and where people can find you next.
All right, so I've got my books over at the dealer table, the Utah Speculative Fiction Writers. Also, I've got some free bookmarks up here, so if you're collecting swag, come get that.
After the banquet, I'm going to be playing games in the lobby. Come join me.
Sorry. Hi. So I have 2 more things. I'm leaving here to go to a panel called How to Write a Great First Page that is over in Exhibit Hall C. And then there's a recording of the Writing Excuses podcast that is happening at 3 that I'll be doing. And I I don't know, last night the Barnes & Noble people ran out of my books, so I don't know if they got some more today. I have no idea, I haven't been over there. If not, there are other places where you can find them.
Yep. And I'm going to be out of here for the day, so goodbye, everybody. And you have my flyer. I've got some writing workshops you can find out about. And if you want to take one, just email me and ask about your discount for being here today.
Awesome.